Welcome to this short video on active and passive voice. This is two parts. This is part two of a lesson on active and passive voice. So please make sure that you've listened to and watched the previous video and read the appropriate pages in the Essay Writing for Canadian Students book on verbs and on active and passive voice before you attempt to do the exercises in this video. I'm going to have you do a few exercises in this video, and this is what I'm going to request that you do. Identify the verbs in the following sentences as active or passive. Revise sentences in which the passive voice is inappropriate or ineffective. So essentially, the exercise has two parts. First, you'll need to decide whether the sentence is in active or passive voice, and you will be able to decide that from the information I gave you on the previous video and the information that's in the textbook about this. Once you've made that decision, you can revise the sentence. If you see that it's in passive voice and needs to be rewritten into active voice to make it more clear, then you just go ahead and revise that sentence. So first step, identify whether it's an active or passive voice. Second step, revise the sentence, make it into active voice if necessary and if it's clearer. So there's three sentences that I'd like you to give this a try with. I'm going to read the sentences, and then you can pause the video and rewrite these sentences into active voice if you think that's necessary, and if you've decided they are, in fact, each one is in fact in passive voice. So once again, decide whether it's an active or passive voice, and then if necessary, rewrite the sentence. The desire by Swift in a modest proposal for better food, clothing, and housing for the Irish is expressed. Their house was bombed during the war. Skilled helicopter pilots lifted terrified flood victims from their rooftops. Please pause the video now and do this exercise. Welcome back. Let's go over the answers. So the first one, this is in passive voice. The desire by Swift in a modest proposal for better food, clothing, and housing for the Irish is expressed. That's the sentence there. So if you said it was in passive voice, you were correct. How do we know it's in passive voice? We know because the subject of the sentence, which is the desire, is not the agent of the action. The desire is not expressing. The desire is being expressed. Somebody is expressing desire. So it's receiving the action. And any time that we have the subject of the sentence receiving the action rather than doing the action, we know that the sentence is in passive voice. Let's switch this sentence into active voice. So in order to switch it into active voice, we need to ask ourselves, who is actually doing the expressing here? Who is doing the action? Who is the agent of the verb? And here we find that Swift, who is the author, is the one that is doing the expressing. So we put him first as the subject of the sentence. Swift expresses the desire for better food, clothing, and housing for the Irish in a modest proposal. Swift is the subject of the sentence, being the author. He is doing the expressing. He is the agent of the action. And so that is an active voice. You can see with this example that the sentence in active voice is much more clear. And that's why it's important to mostly write in active voice. Most of the time you do want to write your sentences in active voice. Here's another one. Their house was bombed during the war. Okay, this sentence is in passive voice, so if you identified it as being in passive voice, you were correct. Why is it in passive voice? It's because their house, which is the subject of the sentence, is not doing the bombing. It is not the agent of the action, it's actually receiving the bombing. Therefore, the sentence is in passive voice. It's actually an appropriate use of passive voice, especially if we're trying to foreground what happened to the house, not who bombed it. If you wanted to change it to active voice to foreground who bombed the house, if you know who bombed the house, you could do so. In that case, you would put the agents of the action, the people or things that bombed the house first. People or things? I don't know. Mostly people, I guess. Unless it's some machine that's doing it. The soldiers bombed their house during the war. The soldiers are the subject. That is the subject, the soldiers, and they are the ones doing the action. So in that case, that is in active voice. In passive voice, we have terrified flood victims were lifted from their rooftops by skilled helicopter pilots. However, in the exercise, this sentence was actually put in active voice for you. Skilled helicopter pilots lifted terrified flood victims from their rooftops.